No fury like a Capitol Hill producer scorned. Chad Pergram, second guest by United States Senator, says they're going to need more than just one copy of this FBI report. Chad to say, no, it's just one copy. End of story. We were hearing from senators and their staffs, and guess who was right? Chad was right. Damn tootin'. Chad Pergram on Capitol Hill. All right, so
it wasn't just me. Mike Emanuel as well. He reported that as well.
Fine. It was just that you reported that a lot of people were just incredulous. Oh, that can't be. How did they make that work today? Are they making it work? It's just one copy. What is it, like the Magna Carta? And they got
it's basically one copy, yeah. And Tim Kaine, the Democratic senator from Virginia, indicated that even if you had all 100 senators file through, even 2 o'clock in the morning, you couldn't get everybody through because there's not enough time. Lisa Murkowski, the Republican senator from Alaska, who seems to be undecided at this hour, she said something very interesting when I spoke with her about 2 hours ago. She said that there are readers. And I said, well, what's a reader? And she said, well, they are actually reading the report to us because there's one copy and they can't all have that copy in their hands at one time. She said now she could ask to look at something, but apparently there are people in the room who are reading the report to the senators. This is a very strange process. We understand for security reasons why there might only be one copy. That's the problem. But again, can people really digest and process this and then make their decision by the time they want to kick this into motion this weekend, Neil?
Now, are there clip notes of this thing, or is it just that they've got all the interviews and you read them? Because it could go into many, many pages, I would assume, right?
Right. We don't know the length. I mean, there are briefers there who can kind of ask questions, maybe interpret. But basically, senators have to go through this and make their own decision. As Lisa Murkowski said to me, it's getting close to decision time. And what's going to happen over the next couple of days here on Capitol Hill? Well, just about 3:45, I was told by a senior Republican source that the procedural vote to start this into motion has not been locked in yet. But we are expecting that to be sometime before lunch tomorrow. Now, what happens if you vote to cut off debate, invoke cloture is the term of art here on Capitol Hill, is it starts a 30-hour clock. If the opponents of the nomination want to burn all that time, let's say they vote at 11 o'clock. Let's say they close the vote by about 11:30, and there are 51 yeas on that. That clock starts to run, and that means automatically, unless there's an agreement, that the confirmation vote on Brett Kavanaugh would be about 5:30 on Saturday afternoon. Now, you can speed that up if the other side wants to give up some of that time. We just don't know yet, Neil.
All right, but there is a possibility that a lot of people could give up talking, and let's say, hypothetically, there were a show on Fox at 10 a.m. Eastern time on Saturday. Right. It went till noon. That vote could, in fact, happen during that time period, right?
I think you are right in the wheelhouse, Neil. I think that cloture vote is going to happen at that point. You know, the rule is that it happens 1 hour after the Senate convenes. Now, if they really wanted to step on the gas, what you would do, because we've heard some reports that senators have commitments over the weekend. There's a wedding, there's a funeral, there's several things that people want to do, their campaign events. You could have the Senate go out tonight, come in at 12:01 in the morning Friday, so about 8 hours from now, and then by rule start at 1:01, vote to invoke cloture by, say, 1:40, and then finish this off by 7:30 in the morning on Saturday. I know that doesn't work with your program schedule, but that would be in the cards too. But that's not what we're hearing. We're thinking it's going to be a late morning vote tomorrow.
Well, if you could convey my needs to them and the timing of the show, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
As would America. All right, Chad, you're the best, buddy. Thank you very much. You and Mike doing a great job there.
Thank you.
All right, the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, has been slamming the Republicans over how this report was handled. Take a look at it.
The fact that there's only one document in there for 100 senators is another example of constraining the ability of all senators and the American public to see the whole truth and nothing but.
All right, now we're told this is how they do it. There is an FBI document that must be shared and read in secrecy by senators. This is how they do it, and they've long done it when Democrats are in charge, Republicans in charge. That's what I've been told. Who would know better than South Dakota Republican Senator Mike Brown? Senator, is that true, that this is just the way it is?
It is. It was actually established back in 2009 between the Obama administration and the Judiciary Committee, who at that time was under the control of the Democrats. But it's not as bad as what it sounds. I've been through it. I went through 2.5 hours of review. Lisa Murkowski is correct in that some of it we actually asked staffers to read for all of us. At one point, there were 17 of us there that were sitting around, and we said, look, why don't you just begin reading some of this, because it'd be easier for us to listen to some of it, while at the same time, there are parts that we were taking and looking at individuals' reports themselves. And so all of it worked out very well.
Is it voluminous? I mean, I know you can't share details, but is it a lot of pages? Is it thick? What?
Well, each individual that it's fair to say, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this. I think there were 10 individuals with 11 reports or something like that, right. It's not that many pages, so it's most certainly doable. And if you wanted to sit down and do it all by yourself, you could do it in a couple of hours. But we just kind of felt that we got more out of it by sharing our thoughts as we went through and reviewed the portions and the comments that were made by the individuals directly to the FBI. It was very informative as far as I was concerned.
Interesting. Senator, obviously you're quite familiar with the protest happening maybe in the building you are now and outside, and a lot of people not satisfied with the results and hoping that there's some last-minute development that could stop this. Have you had a chance to talk to your Republican colleagues, particularly Susan Collins or Jeff Flake or Lisa Murkowski, where they are leaning?
Well, I think they're doing their due diligence. Several, matter of fact, all of them were in the room when I was in the room. They're working their way through it. I think we have to make sure that they have an opportunity to be thoughtful and to work their way through it. That's their role. I think they're taking it very seriously. Look, I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to overcome the resist groups, the opposition groups that are out there. I mean, let's be honest, Neil, the realization is that the vast majority of the Democrats set up front, they weren't going to vote for him. And in fact, rather than actually taking a look at the real role of the Senate with regard to advise and consent, this was really a search and destroy mission for the Democrats from day one. The problem is when they went searching, they didn't find enough. They didn't find hardly anything. And so their destroy mission is failing right now, and it's because there's been due diligence done. And we've got members in the United States Senate right now that are moving towards having a good, strong comfort level with voting for Mr. Kavanaugh, with Judge Kavanaugh.
All right, we will see about that. Maybe just a sign of how crazy this whole process became, Senator. We're getting a letter now that was sent to Chairman Grassley and the ranking member, Dianne Feinstein, from these friends of Brett Kavanaugh, Delancey Davis, Bernard McCarthy, Paul Murray, Matthew Quinn. Some people might be familiar with some of their nicknames. I'm not going to get into that. Where they had to define what Devil's Triangle meant. They go on to say that we write to clear up the misunderstanding about that phrase, Devil's Triangle, that appeared in a 1983 high school yearbook, including on our individual yearbook pages. Devil's Triangle was a drinking game, they go on to write, we came up with in high school. It was a variation of the game Quarters. When we played Devil's Triangle, 4 people sat at a table. On the table, 3 small glasses of beer, forming a triangle. The fact that they had to send that letter to clarify something they did back in high school maybe shows you how quickly this veered.
Yeah, look, it's continuing on, but once again, I commend Chairman Grassley and the committee. They're bending over backwards to try to answer any and all questions from any of the members, and they're really doing it with only part of their staff, because normally the staff works on a bipartisan basis. In this particular case, it's Republicans that are responding, and in many cases, there's actual evidence where, even in the case of investigations where the Dems, their staff actually came in and said, we're here on a protest, we're not even going to participate in the Q&As. So the intent here was never to have an advice and consent. The intent on the part of the Democrats was search and destroy. It is failing. Their search did not turn up what they expected to have turn up.
All right, Senator, thank you very, very much. We'll see what happens. In the meantime, something else was happening that would, on another day, maybe be a lead story, and that is a big pow for the Dow. Susan Leon, what happened today? Susan?
We've recovered from the lows of the session, Neil, and I know it sounds counterintuitive that stocks actually sell off on concerns that the U.S. economy is doing too well, maybe running too hot, that the Federal Reserve may have to raise interest rates even further. But it's interesting that we're taking a look at the 10-year yield, because it's bond yields that have people concerned, because it's indicative of how much higher interest rates might go. So we're sitting at the highest now in 7 years, and this 10-year yield is important because consumer loans, like mortgage rates, like auto loans, are based off this this yield. So if we're looking at the highest in 7 years, mortgage rates are also at the highest in 7 years as well. And that's really depressing stocks. People have been taking money out of the high performers this year. That's a technology sector. So the likes of Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, really facing the brunt of the selling today. But on the opposite side, you have financials doing really well. The big banks, because they make more money when you pay higher interest, and hence more money goes to these banks. But, let's put things in perspective. Yes, we're close to 5% when it comes to mortgage rates, highest in 7 years. Still well off the 17% you were paying in the early 1980s, right?
All right, you don't have to remind me of my age, young lady. All right, thank you, Susan, very, very much. Susan was saying that more from these boys' letter at Boys at the Time, where they had to define that the phrase "Devil's Triangle" had no, hidden meaning. To quote the end of their letter, it had any sexual meaning. If it did in the early 1980s, we didn't know it. That's what this became. More to this.
This is still.
All right, these protests are still going on in Washington inside the Senate Hart building. We are told that security guards are going to be taking them out in groups of 20 here. That might prove easier said than done as they get a little riled up here. But it has been peaceful. There hasn't been anything approaching the nasty or violent, but they're not happy with what now looks like, and that's always a leap, to say the inevitable ascension of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court of the United States. It's just looking increasingly that way. After an FBI report, it seemed to reassure some concerned Republicans and maybe one key Democrat. We'll get up to date on that and where this FBI report differs from the half dozen prior to it. Christy Remington is a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. She was part of the team that conducted Brett Kavanaugh's 5th background investigation. And Deputy, very good to have you. First of all, why were there so many, and was there, and I know you can't reveal details, what was unique about the 5th investigation that you were overseeing?
So I was part of the team that helped with the confirmation to the D.C. Circuit, and Brett had many more background investigations prior to that point, so that's why it came upon the 5th. And
I see.
Just like any other judicial candidate, he was subjected to a full field background investigation and also a vet in the Office of Legal Policy.
So, General, what comes up in that? I mean, we're told that this separate investigation into these charges from these women was something that did not and was not part of anything prior because no one knew about them, right?
I was not aware of any of these allegations prior to the reports in the media, for sure. The FBI conducts their investigation going back to about the 18th birthday, and what we generally look at when we're looking at judicial nominations is what has this person done as an adult, what have they done as a lawyer, and what kind of judge they would be.
All right, now, is that a little bit different than what happened here, focusing on, one charge, actually it being several charges? How is that different from what you had to do and the context, the way it was put together?
Sure. The FBI generally is sent out to verify the information that the nominee provides in their standard Form 86. It sounds really boring because it usually is. So they're looking at your employment verification. They're looking at if you are who you say you are. They're looking at your suitability for a position of competence in the United States. And importantly, they ask people whether you have an alcohol problem, whether they exhibited you, whether you were they'd seen you taking drugs or abusing alcohol in any way.
So that would have come up if there were people concerned about that in the routine course of investigation. It would come up.
Yes, in every background investigation that he had, it would have been asked.
So do we know whether, and I'm taking a leap here, and I apologize, whether it came up either in yours or prior investigations?
I, of course, can't talk about what I've read, but I can tell you that the Bush administration had an extremely high bar for judicial nominations. And if we had any concerns about anything, an individual would not have been nominated.
You handle that very judiciously, and I appreciate that. Christy Remington, thank you very, very much. All right, we are told, by the way, that Joe Manchin is still reading these documents and going through them. So while he's reading that, we have the guy who wants to take him on and take his job after this. They're not going to get any happier in the next couple of days, and it looks like, and I stress, looks like Brett Kavanaugh will close the deal, and among the closest votes in Supreme Court history, make his way there. How do you explain this phenomenon in the context of this rage that builds in America? Tucker Carlson is here. Of course, he is our star and author of yet another runaway bestseller, Ship of Fools, How a Selfish Ruling Class is Bringing America to the Brink of Revolution. And when I was going to this, I was looking, first of all, at the individuals you bring up. And you are a bipartisan basher. You go after, titans of business, Republicans, Democrats, all to explain this rage, for want of a better term, against the elite.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it from the inside. I live in Washington. I've lived there my whole life, pretty much. And the hatred of what's happening, the political revolution of 2 years ago, was completely bipartisan. And the divide wasn't between Republicans and Democrats. It was between people who've, gotten richer since the financial crash and those who haven't. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
This is what we're seeing is a reaction against everybody else from Washington, New York, and LA. And you can see in the protests, by the way. These are not the children of the working class. These are not people who took time off from HVAC school to go protest or block traffic. These are the kids of orthodontists and lawyers and sort of professional people.
What is driving them? They're the ones that, you can always say, well, elections have consequences. Donald Trump won. This is one of the benefits of it. You pick Supreme Court justices. They don't like the Supreme Court justice. Then this whole thing came up. This has to be the most sordid of all judicial nominations we've ever seen.
Well, I think in general, the volatility is being driven mostly by economic factors. Everyone wants to make it about race. Everything's about race. I don't think that, actually. I think that most people believe their kids will make less than they make. Most young people are poorer than their parents were. Yeah. No, poor them.
Don't leave them a penny.
No, trust me, I'm not going to.
Start thinking you will.
Spending it all in Barbados.
There you go.
But no, I work in cable. I have no fortunes. But no, people under 30 don't have cars. They can't get married. They can't buy homes. It's a different. That's a huge problem. When you look at these numbers, say half of millennials prefer socialism. It's it's because their professors are socialists, but also it's because whatever this thing is that we're practicing is not working for them. That's a real thing that I think is too often ignored.
But is that what they call the deep state, Tucker? When people refer to that, because they would always, these new terms would come up and say, it's the deep state, it's this, and they're the ones fighting Donald Trump. What is it?
Well, there is a permanent bureaucracy. There's 3 million people in the executive branch who can't be fired, and they have discrete economic interests that they're protecting. So that's part of it. They vote as a bloc. It's a unionized operation. It's wholly democratic. That's the world I grew up in. I can promise you that's the case. But it's more than that. D.C. is the richest metro area in America. Things are more prosperous there. Drive from D.C. to Pittsburgh and see what the rest of the country looks like. And it's a 5-hour drive, and you see places where every car dealership is closed. So that's a lot of it. Let me just say this. The higher the percentage of fentanyl ODs or heroin ODs in your zip code, the higher the percentage of Trump voting was. That tells you a lot about what this was about.
Since you're a bipartisan basher and you go after everyone from Mitch McConnell and all this, business titans at Bezos and all, but you send out a warning at the end of your book talking about Donald Trump while not necessarily associating him, but the protest movement that he represented. As a warning, you say, I guess to the establishment, whatever you want to call it, voters will become vengeful and reckless. They will elect politicians like Donald Trump as a sign of displeasure. If they continue to feel ignored, they will support increasingly radical leaders who over time will destroy the ruling class, along with everything that made it prosperous. Left untended, democracies self-destruct. Is there a risk here?
Absolutely. Look what happened in Venezuela. I went there as a kid. Caracas was a real city. Now there's no toilet paper. They're eating zoo animals. Why is that? Because they didn't have natural resources? Please. They had a huge middle class, educated population. People looked up one day and they're like, wait a second, 9 families control the whole economy, but we still have the vote. And to punish them, we're going to elect this guy, Hugo Chavez, and then Nicolas Maduro. Radical populism. It wasn't left-wing. It could have been right-wing.
Who's controlling things now in that environment? And Donald Trump appeals to the upper 1 or 2% control a lot of things because he's made them a lot wealthier. You could use the same argument.
Well, not by the metrics of Election Day 2016. Maybe that has changed. Some of this is hard to know.
That's what I'm saying, that since then, the people who might have been confounded by his success are the same ones profiting on it.
That's possibly true. And I don't know enough about that, about where we are in terms of voter preference and Trump. But I know in 2016, the overwhelming majority, That's where the realignment started. People I know, relatives of mine, who voted Republican since Lincoln, are all of a sudden like, wait a second. No, we're against
but
this.
It's Republican in name only on the rhino thing. I mean, there are some who wear that badge proudly, and others, I think you mentioned like the conservative icon, Bill Kristol, is someone who uses it.
So my problem, Crystal's in the book, he's there not really in reference to Trump, but really as a way to explain what's wrong with D.C. Here you advocate for things that sounded good but didn't work. You continue doing it. The verdict is in on these ideas, these foreign policy ideas.
He doesn't like the outside the petri dish Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even about Crystal. It's about everyone like him in the city.
Didn't you say that he was not a fan of Ron Paul, that it would be better if he ran as a third?
For sure.
Right.
But here is someone who advocated, there are many like him, who advocated for this idea, and it didn't work, and they refused to concede they were wrong or to learn from it. That's deeply frustrating. If your kids did that, would you spank them? Yes, you would.
But do you think that given this environment, how much the elite have not learned that Donald Trump is reelected?
I don't know, but I think that, look, I'm not actually for populism.
Right.
Populism is what you get when you ignore what voters want.
Yeah.
They punish you with it. Exactly, and they have reason to be. So if you want to stop the volatility, and I do, you need to respond to what they actually want. If they say, we kind of want our borders under control, you better do it.
Makes sense. Tucker Carlson, Chip of Fools, great success here at Fox. I knew him when. I envy him, frankly. I kicked off at him. But I've moved on and not focused on him at all. It's all about me. All right.